Hi, Ravi here. In my previous talk on Arthur Coke Burnell, I spoke about the Pahlavi inscriptions that he on St. Thomas Mount that he deciphered, and unconsciously I drifted towards the Pahlavi language. Of course, I was able to get back to my subject on time, but I thought, why not do a separate session on the Pahlavi language and the Sasanian dynasty that patronized it? Well, Pahlavi is not exactly a language. It is more often used to describe the script, and sometimes both. It was actually used to write Middle Iranian. The Persian, the form of Persian that was used in the early centuries of the Christian era. The Pahlavi script is a descendant of the Aramaic script. It is derived from the Aramaic script. Now, Aramaic script was in wide use throughout the Middle East and Iran. The Aramaic language was a language which Jesus Christ spoke. But why did Jesus Christ speak this language? Because it was the most popular one. And the reason for its popularity was that it was the official language of the Persian Achaemenid Empire, which ruled over the whole of West Asia, Middle East, Central Asia, Northern and also parts of Northern Africa and Europe. It was actually one of the largest empires that ever existed, and prior to the arrival of Alexander the Great, the biggest empire that anyone had ever seen. So this Aramaic script was actually a Semitic script, and since it was used to write a Semitic language, but during the Sasanian period it was used to write an Indo-Iranian language. But since this was quite it was never before it was always used to write a Semitic language prior to the Iranians adopting it for an Indo-Iranian language. There were it had plenty of ideograms, short words that were written that actually depicted a Semitic word. But while reading it, its readers were mostly Indo-Iranians, mostly Iranians. Read its Indo-Iranian equivalent. So these ideograms are known as Huzwarish in Persian. The most famous example of a Huzwarish is the word Malka. Malka is a Semitic word which meant Malka or Malik is a Semitic word which meant king. Sorry, it's not Malka. Malik. Malik is a Semitic word which meant king, and Malika means queen. An Iranian would write Malik in Pahlavi script, but while reading it, he would read it as Shah. So he would write it. He would write Malka and Malka, but he would read it as Shahanshah. Both just meant the same. Malka is a Semitic equivalent, and Shah is a Persian Indo-Iranian equivalent of king. And the word Shah is actually derived from the old Iranian Shahitiya, which is cognate with the Indic Kshatriya, signifying royalty. The word Shahinshah is derived from Shayatiya noun, which was in vogue during the Achaemenid period. It is an old Iranian word. So the dynasty which popularized this script, the Sasanians, they ruled from 226 AD to 651 AD. The first of the Sasanians was a ruler called Ardeshir Babagan, or Ardeshir the first. Now Ardeshir was the son of a man called Babag, and that's why he was known as Ardeshir Babagan, the son of Babag. Now Babag was a humble shepherd who lived in the Iranian plateau. The story goes that the then viceroy of Persia was then under the within the Parthian Empire. The Parthians were ruling over it, and the Parthian viceroy of Persia, he had just met Babak just once, and soon after he had a dream. A few days after or shortly after, he had a dream. He dreamt that Babak was seated on an elephant, and he also dreamt that his face was very radiant, and there was a halo around his face or something like that, similar. He called a traditional interpreter of dreams, who explained that this signified that Babak was he belonged to an important lineage, and that his son would become the emperor of Persia. The then Parthian viceroy, he was quite fascinated by this. So he was curious and fascinated. He called Babak, and he gave his daughter to him in marriage. And but prior to that, he inquired with Babak about his lineage, and Babak explained that he was a son of Sasan, and that through Sasan he had descended from the last Achaemenid ruler, Darius III, or Darius Hystaspes in Latin, or in Persian he was known as Darius Gushtasp. So he descended from Darius III. That's what he said. And so he was given the viceroy's daughter in marriage, and Ardeshir was born to them. And this Ardeshir, he collected an army and fought against the last Parthian ruler, Artabanus, or as is locally known, Artavan. This Ardeshir, he ruled Persia from 226 to 240 AD. His reign witnessed the revival of Zoroastrianism. He patronized Zoroastrianism, which had grown moribund under the Parthians. Also, its scriptures claim. The name Ardeshir is of course a modern equivalent of his name then would have been Artakshatra or Artakshasa. Artakshasa is actually a combination of two different Persian terms. Artha means Artha and Shatra. Artha meant it was an abstractive term which meant justice or the good faith or religion. And Shatra means, Shatra again is cognate with Kshatriya and Shayatiya, and of course Kshatrapavan, or as the Greeks would call it, satrap. So it's cognate with that. So Artakshatra means the upholder of the faith, or upholder of righteousness or the faith. As I said, Artha is an abstract term that couldn't be translated into English. So Ardeshir, he revived Zoroastrianism, and according to a quasi-prophet, according to a book of quasi-prophetic sayings called Bundahish, he was a person who revived Zoroastrianism. It says that Zoroastrianism would be overthrown thrice and revived thrice. First by Alexander the Great. It would be then it would be revived by Ardeshir. Secondly, it would be overthrown by a prophet called Mani, and it would be restored by a king called Shapur the second. Thirdly, it would be overthrown by the Arabs, and it would be restored at the end of it would be restored after a few millennia by a character called semi-mythical character called Shushan. Of course, the last part of the prophecy is yet to be realized. Only the first part has come true, and these are quasi-prophetic because they were probably written down later. They just appear to be prophetic, but they aren't prophecies. They appear to have been written down later. Now, Ardeshir ruled for just 14 years, and he was succeeded by his son, Shapur the first. Now, Shapur the first ruled for about 31 years. It was he who largely expanded the empire. He defeated the Armenians, he vanquished the Armenians, the Huns. But his most famous victory was against the Roman Emperor Valerian. It was a fascinating victory, fascinating and unexpected, because the Persians were always the underdogs, and they were at the wits' end at the hands of the Romans. One rare instance when they did have the upper hand against the Romans was when they defeated the Romans at the Battle of Karhe. That was when the Parthians were in power. But the Parthians were always at the losing end at the hands of the Romans. Shapur the first, actually, he successfully he defeated Valerian, though this was not possible in a straightforward way. He was actually betrayed by his own soldiers, and he was handed over to Shapur. So after following his soon after Shapur's victory, he took a Valerian prisoner. This depiction of this scene is available at a place called Nakshe-Rustam, where Shapur is shown on a horseback wielding a mace and with a halo around his head, and the Roman emperor, the great Roman emperor Valerian, prostrates before him in chains. And this was indicative. It's also kind of imperial symbolism. He wanted to showcase his might to the Persian Empire, the Persian people, which is why Shapur had this sculpted on the walls of a place called Nakshe-Rustam. Once captured, Valerian was he was imprisoned. There are various stories about the fate of Valerian's fate. One claims that one particular story actually perturbs us a great deal. It claims that Valerian was actually he was killed and he was skinned alive, and that his skin was hung at it was he was his dead body was no, actually it says that he was killed and his dead body was hung at a public place. where mothers thought where mothers taught human anatomy to young girls. Or this is what Henry Rawlinson, perhaps the greatest, George Rawlinson, a great uranologist and brother of another uranologist, Henry Rawlinson, once said. So, but we hope that um, Valerian did not suffer such misfortunes and such indignities. There is another story which claims that he was treated very generously by Shapur I, and he resided with him in the palace and as an important dignitary. Well, another important event of Shapur's reign was the rise of a person named Mani. Now, this person, Mani, he was a kind of a hermit, a kind of he was hailed as a kind of prophet like Buddha, Jain, and the later prophets of Islam and other religions. He at an early age he got a revelation like the Buddha, and what happened, he started preaching a new kind of some claim it as a new form of Zoroastrianism, and some feel it is a new form of Christianity, in fact, because it had a lot of things in common with Christianity. For example, he invented the concept of Abba Rabuta, or the Father God. The concept of the Abba Rabuta was quite similar to that of the Christian Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. So they believe that what he started was a sect of Christianity, but others feel it was a sect of Zoroastrianism. But he became very powerful. He had a lot of followers, and he became very powerful quickly. So what happened? He wasn't. He went to Shapur's court and tried to preach to him. He wanted him to convert, but Shapur the first did not convert. Nevertheless, he did not persecute them either. He was kind of a friend of these Mani's disciples are known as Manichaeans. He was a kind of he protected these Manichaeans, though he did not convert to a religion. And Mani wouldn't keep quiet. He first tried to convert him, then he tried to flatter him. In fact, he named the most important text of his new religion, Manichaeism, as Shapuragan, in honor of Shapur the First, in order to flatter him. It was a kind of a Manichaean Bible, in fact, this Shapuragan. It was so important to that religion, and he named it after Shapur the First. But Shapur did not convert, and Shapur the First tolerated them, and after him succeeded his son Varahran the First. Varahran is actually a Middle Persian word. We'll trace the origin and evolution of this word from Old Persian to New. Varahran actually has its roots in the Old Persian word Veretragna. Veretragna was a Zoroastrian deity. Now this Veretragna was none other than the Hindu god Indra. So how could this be? Well, the word Veretragna is composed of two parts actually. You have Vritra and Gna, the killer of Vritra. Now, those who might be familiar with Hindu mythology might be knowing that there was a time when Indra was actually overthrown from being the king of the gods by a person named Vritra. And this Vritra actually ruled over, and in course of time he became overbearing and very very arrogant and even evil. He wanted to take Indra's wife as his own. And so what happened? Indra had been cursed actually till then. He emerged from his curse and he vanquished Vritra and killed him. So Vritragna is nothing but Vritragna, or the killer of Vritra in Sanskrit. So this Vritragna of Old Persian later became it was a name of a god, and it was also a widely used Iranian name. It evolved into Varahran in Middle Persian, which subsequently became in New Persian, which subsequently New Persian became Bahram. So people who have the name Bahram, they are actually named after the Vedic god Indra. So this Varahran the first ruled for some time, for 1 or 2 years, and he was succeeded by Varahran the second. Varahran the second was actually he was hostile to the Manichaeans, and during his time, Zoroastrian priest, conservative radical Zoroastrian priest by name Kertir, grew in influence, and became he was given the post of sort of high priest of the kingdom. Now this Kartir, he actually, upon assuming power, he immediately issued an edict. He actually banned all religions other than Zoroastrianism. So this included Christianity, Buddhism, Brahmanism, Jainism, and I don't think Jainism. I think the Buddhists are mentioned. Buddhism and Hinduism were all prohibited by him. And he also targeted these Manichaeans. And at this instance, Varahran the second captured this person Mani, and he just skinned him. And his skin was he flayed him alive, and his skin was displayed outside the palace at Ctesiphon. Ctesiphon was the Persian capital. So his fate was similar, probably similar to that of Valerian, in case the first legend about Valerian was true. But these Manichaeans were extremely hardy and resolute people. They in fact, this Manichaeism survived in Iran till the arrival of the Muslims, and though it did not flourish, it was a minority religion always. And after the Muslims came, these Manichaeans fled eastwards into China, and this faith actually there were many Chinese Manichaeans in the 16th century, as late as the 16th century. So it survived for nearly 1400 years.